ಮಾಡಿಟ್ಟಿರಬೇಕು ವಿಡಿಯೋದು ಆಯಿತಾ.
And this is just the protocol I've mentioned here, shown here, where 12 reconstructed epidermis. We bought this cell line, 3D kit from L'Oreal company from France, and they provide in 12 3D skin with the inserts. So it's really easy to perform also. And once we get it delivered to the lab, we always keep it in the maintenance media and incubated 37-degree with 5% carbon dioxide and 98% relative humidity for 24 hours. And then these cell lines or 3D skin surface, which is really small, 1 centimeter square in surface area, and they are dosed with a neat compound in acetone. And at different time intervals, we collect the receptor fluids, and with the help of the cotton bud, we impregnated with hexane or ethyl acetate, we just wipe off the surface of the skin to find out any residual amount remaining on the skin surface, which has not passed through the skin. And the below the skin insert, we just take the skin out, and then we analyze the receptor fluid also, and then the skins are homogenized and further subjected to extraction and cleanup to find out any skin depot, or your if compound is really lipophilic in nature, then it gets retained in the skin depot. So we perform LCMS or GCMS for analysis further. And here there are here few more like 6 papers based on the 3D synthetic skin model absorption, which I have published during my PhD, 3 years PhD program, and you can always refer these for further details. After absorption, we'll discuss about the distribution. Distribution is really important when the extent of binding to plasma influences the way in which the drug distributes into tissues in the body. If a compound is highly bound, then it is retained in the plasma, which results in low volume of distribution. And only the free fraction of the compound is truly bioavailable. And the bound one is not available. So that is known as unbound fraction and fraction or freely formed. So how we perform the distribution studies? Here in the diagram, I have shown that there are 2 compartments. One is the plasma, and then is another one is the buffer. Usually we spike the plasma with your compound, and we take out the buffer side the samples, and then we see if there is any drug molecule which has passed through the membrane to the other side of the compartment or not. So similar principle goes for other equilibrium dialysis using the brain homogenate, where we check whether your compound is CNS penetrant or not. Whole blood binding assays. This is important for some of the, if you are interested to understand whether your molecule will get bind to erythrocytes or whether it will be in the freely form. And for some drugs, such as anti-malarial, it's very important to understand whether the molecule is binding to erythrocytes or not. Microsomal binding assays. This is performed when we are looking into the in vitro metabolism studies. Sometimes it happens that the molecule gets bind to the microsomes, and that's not available for metabolism. So it's we perform microsomal binding assay as well. So blood to plasma ratio, as I have earlier mentioned, that it is the concentration of drug in the whole blood compared to the plasma, and it provides an indication of drug binding to erythrocytes. And this is just the formula how to we calculate the blood plasma ratios. And the blood to plasma ratio can also be used to understand the potential hematotoxicity of any compound. At blood to plasma ratio, if it is greater than 1, then the results indicate that the drug is distributing into the erythrocytes. Coming to the biotransformation, where drugs are enzymatically altered to more water-soluble metabolites to aid excretion from the body. And as you know, there are two types of phase 1 and phase 2 reaction. Phase 1 reaction involves oxidation, reduction, and hydrolysis. And in the phase 2 with the conjugation reactions with glutathione or sulfation reactions. Here in the below, it's a reaction I have mentioned here, where how the oxygen free radical is inserted into the substrate, and this is how the metabolite is formed. Here another example where I have shown the curcumin, which undergoes phase 1 and phase 2 reaction. Phase 1 forms dihydrocurcumin and tetrahydrocurcumin or hexahydrocurcumin. Phase 2 are the conjugation pathways like curcumin glucuronide formed by glucuronidase enzymes, or the curcumin sulfate formed by sulfate enzymes. And the reaction is really fast for the curcumin glucuronide formation. So we always find curcumin glucuronide in the in the blood samples. Metabolic stability, and this is a really heart of ADME studies, where we perform metabolic stability for your compound. The main principle of metabolic stability studies is we monitor the disappearance of test compound by incubating the test compound in the microsomes in presence of NADPH, which is a cofactor, and then the reaction is sequenced using methanol plus internal standard before injecting into the LCMS. So let us see what is the liver microsome, what is liver S9 fraction, and what are the hepatocytes. Liver is chopped, in the protocol on the right side I have shown. The liver is chopped into pieces, and then we find the hepatocyte suspensions, and these hepatocytes are the intact cells of liver, which can be cryopreserved hepatocytes or primary hepatocyte cultures. And these hepatocytes are far better than the microsomes or S9 fraction, because they have the advantage that they contain the full complement of enzymes of both the phase 1 and phase 2 metabolism. And then we always find the Vmax values. As you can see, for hepatocytes, the unit is picomole per minute per 10⁶ cells in any assays. This is the minimum requirement. And then for other fractions like liver microsomes, we homogenize the liver cells, liver, any tissue, and then we centrifuge the samples at 10,000 G. The supernatant is the S9 fraction, which is just the post mitochondrial supernatant fraction, which contains both these cytosolic or microsomal enzymes. If the below the if we obtain the centrifuged or the pellet fractions, that is the microsomal fraction at higher RPM, more than 100 G, then in the liver microsome we get only the phase 1 enzymes, and they are easy to use, cheap, and needs cofactor along with other requirements to perform the assays. And here the enzyme kinetics, where the mechanism of enzyme or catalyzed reaction, which is often studied by kinetic measurements on enzyme substrate reaction systems. You have already gone through this Michaelis-Menten equation, where Vmax and then substrate concentration and Km value, where Vmax is the rate attained when the enzyme sites are saturated with the substrate. And then the Km, which is an intrinsic property of an enzyme. It is just the measure of affinity of the enzyme for the substrate. CYP inhibition studies, as I've earlier mentioned, that CYP inhibitions are really important when we perform the drug-drug interaction studies in vivo model or in vitro studies. In the table I've mentioned here as enzyme substrate with its inhibitor. We always try to find the Ki values, which is the intrinsic inhibitor constant, and then IC50 of an enzyme, which is the concentration of inhibitor, which produces 50% of inhibition of any drug. And the potent inhibition, we interpret the data as a potent inhibition when IC50 is less than 1 micromolar in concentration. Moderate inhibition, IC50 between 1 to 10 micromolar. No or weak inhibition when IC50 value is more than 10 micromolar. And there are different types of CYP inhibitions. We always mention as competitive, mixed, non-competitive, or uncompetitive, based on whether the inhibitor binds only to the free enzymes and so on. Time-dependent inhibition is another, assays we perform, where it is defined as an interaction where there is an enhanced inhibition of the test compound in a pre-incubated with metabolizing system prior to addition of substrate, whether there is an intrinsic inhibition property of the enzyme. So we always perform these assays to find out K inact or Ki values, and that is the kinetic constant of time-dependent inhibitions. Mechanism-based inhibition, another type of inhibition where we monitor the chemically reactive metabolite formed in the inhibitions. Reaction phenotyping is done in vivo metabolic clearance studies, where if we want to understand whether there is a phase 1 or phase 2 type of metabolism in vivo studies. So reaction phenotyping is also performed. It can be also performed using the human liver microsomes, and then we always extrapolate it to hepatic in vivo clearance in humans. After inhibition, there is always a question of induction happening, because some molecules induces the activity of the metabolic enzymes, and that could also increase the metabolism of any other concomitant drug administered along with the substrate. So CYP induction studies are also performed, and sometimes induction of CYP enzymes could also lead to toxicity by increasing the reactive metabolite formations. Here is just a diagram where the xenobiotic or any molecule enters into the cytoplasm and then attaches to the PXR activation, that is pregnane X receptors. And then if the molecule or this enters into the cytoplasm, or after the cytoplasm enters into the nucleus, then there is a pregnane X receptor along with the RX, that is retinoid X receptors, which will increase the activity of the enzyme and increase amount of mRNA levels. And these mRNA levels can be quantified using the reverse transcription polymerase chain reactions. Glutathione trapping. Here, glutathione trapping is a self-defense mechanism in the body, where the free radicals are, quenched by glutathione. So we always try to find the reactivity of your molecule based on the GSS trapping, where the reactive metabolite formed via drug metabolism in the body are usually electrophilic species which can bind covalently to any other macromolecules such as proteins and DNAs, affecting their functions and leading to toxicity. So here is just a LCMS chromatogram of you can see the parent compound, and then after the GSS trapping, you can see on the left side there is a plus NADPH along with the parent compound. So the differential mass to charge ratio can be performed to monitor if there is a adduct or the electrophile formed or not. Coming to the most commonly used sample prep method in LCMS bioanalysis, the very important and quick to perform is the protein precipitation method, where biological samples such as blood, plasma, or serum contains many other biological matrix substances. If they are injected into the LCMS directly without performing the protein precipitations, it could precipitate in the column because we always run in reverse phase, sometimes with the organic solvents or buffers in the mobile phase that could block your column of analysis. So it's very important to perform protein precipitation before injecting into LCMS. And here I've shown some other solvents like acetone nitrile, which has the very good high efficiency for precipitation, followed by acetone, ethanol, or methanol. For phospholipids, sometimes titanium dioxide or zirconium oxides can be used in the plates along with the PPT protocol. As zirconium atom coated on the silica surface acts as a Lewis acid, that is the electron acceptor which interacts with phosphate moiety of phospholipids, which is a strong Lewis base. Sometimes formic acid or other acids are also added into the protein precipitation solvent because via phospholipid removal, PPT plate approach to improve the recovery of analyte of interest, particularly those acidic. So it's a very quick protocol for protein precipitation method. Usually this after protein precipitation, we require 5 to 10 minutes of centrifugation at 1500 G, which is sufficient to settle the protein precipitates. Again, the liquid-liquid extraction, if you are trying to extract the analyte of interest and or unwanted interferences components from one liquid phase, that is biological samples, to another immiscible liquid phase. Here, some organic solvents are used along with the aqueous solvents like hexane, chloroform, dichloromethane, heptane, ethyl acetate, etc. This is the solid phase extraction, where you can see in the left diagram uh, where you load the sample on the bonded phase silica solid phase cartridges and solvate the bonded phase with methanol, then flush with usually with water and buffer, and then we load the samples and then elute the unwanted components using the solvents, and then based on the polarity of the solvent, component 1 and component 2 will be eluted further, and then we discard the used cartridges. There are different types of solid phase extraction, as I've already mentioned about the adsorption, ion exchange, like cation, anion exchange, and the mixed mode solid phase extractions. Usually we use OSS HLB cartridges, which are the leaders in solid phase extractions. These are the water products. And here, the 3 papers which I co-authored when I was working at the Jubilant Biosys, where we performed the development and validation of, bicalutamide, which is a PK studies performed in mouse plasma, and the other two are other drugs like lorglutamide, metformin, and ripaglinide. This paper, as we have also performed the development of LCMMS method development and validation using US FDA guidelines. So that is really important when you perform any type of bioanalysis to comply the US FDA guidelines of bioanalysis. After in vitro, in vivo, I also worked in a project during my first postdoc at LGMU, where I worked in a eTranssafe European project where 40 pharma companies were involved with two universities, and where the main objective of the project was to develop a database for translating the preclinical data to clinical studies. So it was a huge task for me to perform or to identify the number of databases related to chemistry, toxicology, ADME, drug discovery, interactions, biological database, protein-protein interaction databases, omics, pathways, and so on. So I have published this paper, in silico toxicology data resources to support read across and QSAR, where I have compiled or consolidated nearly 900 databases, which were identified and reviewed against the criteria related to accessibility, whether those databases are freely available to the public or those databases are restricted. Data coverage, whether you need preclinical or clinical data, interoperability or the application programming interface, that is also important in terms of end users. Appropriate identifiers, for example, if there is a name for any chemicals, and how do you identify the chemicals using the INCHI keys or CAS numbers. Those are identifiers for any molecule or any drug, where you can straight away find any compound using the INCHI keys or CAS numbers. So that is really important when you have millions of compounds in your database. So quick to find out using the appropriate identifiers. And again, that it depends on your what you need, like in vitro, in vivo, or clinical data. And also these databases were really helpful for modeling read across or similarity searching. In this paper, I have shared an Excel spreadsheet where you can always go and play around with the databases. And these databases are really helpful in terms of, if you are doing any project during your MPharm level, you can just pick up one database, for example, in ADME studies, go through all those, find, if you want to perform, say, a classification of many compounds, you need to homogenize the number of compounds or data sets and then perform the machine learning approaches. So there's a lot of available data available in the databases. So you can perform your own case studies using this Excel sheet. And here are some of the papers I published during LGMU job. Here, molecular fingerprint using the similarity searching for toxicological read across, and how to predict the DILI, that is drug-induced liver injury predictions, and also some in silico resources for PBK modeling, and also to find toxicity related to kidney as well. So here is the future of the model informed drug discovery. Nowadays, it has been, these physiologically based pharmacokinetic modeling and simulations are being used heavily, because we always want to minimize the costings and in the drug discovery. So we always try to predict the drug concentration in any of the organs. So this is just like a forecasting, whether the day will be sunny or rainy. But there is always a good prediction matches here in the prediction using the PBK modeling. According to US FDA 2019, they have defined the PBK modeling as a drug development tool that mathematically integrates the physiological, physicochemical, and drug-dependent preclinical and clinical information to predict an investigational drug ADME and pharmacokinetic properties. As you can see, it contains many different aspects like integrating physiological conditions, where you can see different compartments in human bodies divided, and they are connected by circulating blood system. And here each compartment is defined by a tissue volume and tissue blood flow rate, which is specific to the species of interest. Because PBK modeling has been applied not only to humans, but also to the other species like rat or dog, even the pig also. Each tissue is typically described as a perfusion rate limited or permeability rate limited, which are controlled by mathematical expressions like what the concentration of a molecule is entering into the particular organ and how much it comes out of that from that organ. And this PBK modeling always helps in exploring the effects of other extrinsic factors like concomitant medication, food intake, and some intrinsic factors such as age, organ dysfunction, disease status, genetic, or on drug exposure as well. So here is one of the case study I had presented as a poster in Sweden in the European Pediatric Formulation Conference, and this year it was last year's topic. So I just thought it's a good example to showcase here. So the topic was, the risk evaluation of gastrointestinal absorption of quinine and chloroquine in malnourished children using modeling and simulation. So as you know that, in malnutrition, which occurs due to the deficiencies or excesses or imbalances in intake of proteins or calories and other essential micronutrients, which is a really major health problem in infants and older children worldwide, and particularly in developing countries. WHO in 2018, they mentioned that there were nearly 149 million children under 5 years of age who were stunted, and 49 million children are wasted. You already know about the kwashiorkor, where a child might have a swelling of legs, sparse hair, moon face, with little interest in surrounding, flaky appearance of skin, swollen abdomen, thin muscles, but fat present. And in marasmus, the child looks with normal hair, with old man or wizened appearance, thin limbs with little muscle or fat, very underweight body. So why to look for the malnourished children? Because there are sparse pharmacokinetic studies in healthy children, because due to ethical reasons, and really difficult to recruit children in any clinical trials because they are not quite, and they always cry, and there are no good indications for drug dosage modification in malnourished children. We just dose whatever there are recommendation based on the children's or based on the adult studies. Evaluation of nutritional status is highly relevant prior to prolonged drug therapy, especially with drugs having narrow safety margin, and because some drugs, even if there is a slight change in dose or even in the plasma concentration, it could always lead to toxicity when the drugs are narrow therapeutic index drugs like phenytoin. Recently, PBK modeling has been used to predict the GI absorption of the drug during pediatric drug development program, but PBK modeling has never been explored for malnourished children. So this was the motivation for conducting this case study. And from the literature, there are many studies which have shown that in the malnourished children, the PBK properties are altered in this special population as compared to the healthy population. For example, in absorption, there is an alteration of nutrient transport, mucus, mucosal or villus atrophy. As in the previous diagram, you have seen the hair-like projections in the GI tract. So these gets wasted also. And modification of permeability of the intestinal mucosa. And also there is an altered activity of small intestinal enzymes. When it comes to the distribution, this is really important to be monitored for malnourished children, because the protein levels goes down, and that could also affect the plasma concentration also. If there is a low protein in the blood or plasma, then the drug might be in free form, and which could lead to drug toxicity due to higher concentration of drug. And that's really important for anti-I classes of drugs as well. Biotransformation and excretion, there is always a chance of a liver dysfunction in malnourished children, and that could also alter the metabolism of drugs. Impaired renal function, especially in dehydration, significantly influences the drug excretion. So what I did is that I did data mining from the literature, where I found the GI morphological changes such as villus atrophy, that is reduced villus height, number, thinned mucosa, intestinal increased intestinal permeability, loss of tight junction proteins, and increased pore size, leading to delayed absorption of drugs, or plasma concentration resulting in therapeutic failure. In the left, you can see the histological section of the GI tract, where A is for the healthy children, B is for the malnourished children, where you can see the reduced height of your villus, also the crypt depth also. So yeah, those numbers were data mined from the literature, and we use the parameters such as villus height, crypt depth, compared with the default SimSip software. SimSip default GI morphological parameters was also considered and then compared. So to include a parameter such as worst case scenario of GI morphology, say some drugs like anti-cancer drugs in children, it will completely erode the GI surface area. So in that thing, we have considered 50% to match the worst case scenario. And in the SimSip software, we also included parameter like Fischem properties of the drugs, blood binding parameters, and the volume of distribution were also included in the normal and malnourished children. So we compared the pharmacokinetic output using this SimSip software in the normal and malnourished children, and we ran some simulation. And further, those simulations were verified by using a clinical pharmacokinetic data. For example, in chloroquine, two studies data was pulled out and then compared. For example, Salako et al. 1989 study for quinine in healthy and malnourished children was fitted with the simulated data. So here is how the PBK modeling simulation output looks like. On the left side, you can see the mean values of systemic concentration in plasma of quinine hydrochloride over time in healthy children. The green line here indicates the simulated one, and then the orange dots are the clinical data points extracted from the literature. And you can see the reasonably well agreement between the simulated and the observed clinical data points. On the right side, you can see the similar trend was observed for the kwashiorkor children. And overall, there was 1.26-fold increase in AUC, area under curve profile, in kwashiorkor children. However, this 1.26-fold is not that significant, but this is really important when the drug administered is for chronic studies, where you give the drug for a week or months, especially for the anti-malarial drugs. So quinine, as you know, is a narrow therapeutic index. Even a slight fold increase in AUC profile could lead to toxicity in children. So it's very important to consider the plasma profiles in kwashiorkor children as well. Here is the chloroquine, similar way in healthy children on the left side, and the concentration here are in nanogram per ml. And on the right side, you see for the malnourished children also. Here we found that 2.4 and 2.7 fold a decrease in AUC and Cmax of chloroquine in kwashiorkor children. So that means inadequate therapy in kwashiorkor children for the chloroquine molecule. So one should always increase the dose for chloroquine in malnourished children based on therapeutic monitoring. So overall, to conclude that the PBK model predicted lower plasma concentration of chloroquine and increase in quinine in malnourished children in agreement with the observed data. And this study suggests careful consideration for efficacious therapy in malnourished children. It also highlights the importance of incorporating the PBK modeling and simulation in early drug development in special pediatric populations. And further research is required to optimize those PBK models with the potential impact of, the pore size in between the cell lines or leaky mucosa or the foldings in the GI tract, and that could also impact the drug absorption in malnourished or kwashiorkor children. Further, the studies are undergoing in our lab where we are looking into the GI absorption of some drugs. Even I'm trying to, work on the biorelevant media obtained in the GI tract of the children. Recently, I have done the quantitative analysis of 14 bile salts from the GI fluids collected from the children in Birmingham hospitals, and using LCMMS, we quantified the bile salts in children, which was lower in concentration as compared to the adult population. That will show how it is important to consider the solubility and absorption related issues in children as compared to the adults. Thank you very much. That's all I have for today. I hope I have done justice to incorporate all the ADME issues in this presentation, but I'm happy to, if you need any further, clarification or further interest in any of these ADME studies. Thank you very much. Any questions, please?
Thank you, Gopal. Every webinar gives impression that there are a lot of things to learn in this pharmacy profession. So this was one among that. Now I request the participants to raise their hand if they have any questions. Gopal is here, Dr. Gopal, sorry. Dr. Gopal is here to clarify all doubts. And we have one question from Shankar sir. Shankar sir, please unmute yourself and ask the question.
Hello.
Hi,
hello,
sir.
Shankar sir. Yes, please go ahead.
Please ask the question, sir.
Yeah, Dr. Gopal, you have given very nice lecture. Okay, and it is like a journey. Okay.
Yes.
So
yes, I tried to connect my experience in ADME field, which I started in 2013, and I'm still exploring many assays in ADME studies. So yes.
Yeah, it is very good. But whatever the last PBK model you told, how it is useful in, especially as I am a medicinal chemist. In early stage, it is how it is useful. That is
yes,
just
in the early stages, what we can do is, for example, if any molecule is metabolized, say CYP3A4 enzymes. So how do you extrapolate those in vitro finding to in vivo situation? Okay. So we always...
Yes, right, sir. But my question is how I can correlate with the selection of compounds like our publication issues in that area.
Well, PBK modeling is really complex and it depends on the application, Yeah, for example, you are interested in finding the PK profile in, like liver cirrhosis patients. So there are always liver-based models as well. If you are interested in kidney excretion, data for any molecule, then there are kidney models also. You know,
Yeah.
it's a really huge field and it's really evolving and very complex. When I worked at a SimSip Satara company after my PhD, I wanted to learn the art of in vitro to in vivo extrapolation because I had worked on a 3D synthetic skin models. So I was always interested to find, if I use 1 centimeter square of patch of skin model, and how do I extrapolate to whole humans where the skin surface is 2 meters square? And also I need to think of what the dose I need to use in vivo situation, what will be the metabolism of that compound. So SimSip has got a dermal model also, where you can always put in those numbers of your molecule, or if you're a medicinal chemist, you can always optimize your molecule based on the permeability things using those PBK modeling and simulation.
Yes,
Okay.
sir. Sir, there is a one more, just my clarity. You were told like Lipinski rule, there is a log p value is 5, what we understand, what we have learned, and Pfizer rule 4 and GSK 3, but it is how difficult it to one should stick on these filters.
There will be exception also, I think.
Yes, there are many extensions of this Lipinski rule because there nowadays many molecules such as large molecules are coming where you can always expect more than 500 molecular weight. In that case, there are many in-house models available, so you can always refer that one.
Yeah.
Okay. No, just I want to your review. We are studying this. There are exceptions are there and other things. Sir, thank you, sir. Thank you, Gopal. Dr. Gopal, you have given very wonderful lecture.
Thank you.
Sujit,
Thank
you.
you, sir. Thank you, sir. So we have one more question from N. Prem Kumar, sir. Please continue with your question. Go ahead with your question, sir.
Good evening, Power.
Good evening, sir.
Yeah, it was a wonderful speech. My question is, how can you predict the quantified drug in an in vitro with the effect compartment?
Well, there are softwares like virtual cell-based software where you can the model predicts the effective concentration in the cell, accounting for the any binding to the plastics, or even if your drug is binding to the albumin, say albumin, which is a protein in the nutrient media. So in that software, there is a mathematical expression which will always do plus or minus, and then it will give you an exact concentration in the cells in each compartment.
Okay, can it predict the anti-clockwise and clockwise hysteric loops?
Sorry?
Can it predict the anti-clockwise and clockwise hysteric loops in case of non-state study?
Frankly speaking, I don't have any idea about that thing.
Because the metabolites metabolites which are not known, and it because of genetic change, if there is a metabolite can produce a pharmacological action.
Yeah.
That gives an anti-clockwise hysteric loop.
Oh yeah.
Because the effect is seen with low concentration.
Yes, you are right. What we can do for that is we can always perform metabolite fingerprinting, in vitro assays to perform, but prediction of that one at the moment, it all depends on fluxomics or genomic studies or metabolomic studies performed. So
okay.
I'm not aware of, into that field at the moment.
Okay. Thank you. Thanks a lot.
But very good question, which is highly advanced studies are required for such.
Yeah, thank you.
Okay, thank you, Prem Kumar, sir. Now we have one participant, Mr. Samir. He raised his hand. Samir, you can unmute yourself and ask the question.
Yeah, good afternoon, sir. This is regarding the in vitro metabolic prediction. I just what are the tools available for metabolic predictor in vivo and its regulatory acceptance? Because sometimes this is very important information when we use this data to provide justification for impurity in drug product. If it is metabolite, we can easily justify it. So if you can elaborate on the in vitro metabolite prediction tool and its regulatory acceptance. Thank you.
Yeah, well, at the moment, the FDA regulatory requires the in vitro data as well, along with, which can provide a justification for your prediction. So, there are always possibilities of including in vitro, in vivo, as well as the prediction metabolism studies for any regulatory activity.
Okay.
Sir, what are the in vitro tools available for this metabolite prediction?
That's what I have already mentioned about the microsomal stability studies using CYP enzymes or UGT enzymes, even the hepatocyte metabolic studies.
Okay.
So I think Samir, sir, you got the answer. Now we have Dr. Karki sir, Dr. Subhasis Karki sir, and he has some questions. I think sir has raised his hand. Sir, please ask the question.
Gopal.
Hello, sir. How are you doing? Yeah, thank you.
Nice to see your lecture.
Thank you, sir. Yes, sir.
If Lipinski rule, what they are saying, if one violates, what will happen? Out of 5
yeah, if Lipinski rules violates, then there is a possibility of poor bioavailability. But however, there are many molecules such as large molecules which always violate the Lipinski rule. So we need to optimize the main issues with the ADME properties in that case.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
I hope I have
cleared
your question. Yes.
So I have the one question, I think, and then we will conclude this session. So Gopal, you said that we used in silico approach, correct? So my question is that to what extent we can rely on those in silico study data, whether it is toxicology study or whether it is like receptor binding or even in drug discovery. I mean, I mean to ask about the false results obtained during in silico study and compared to the actual study, model study. So how much?
Well, that's a very good question actually. This is what we consider in PBK modeling and development, where we here in the diagram I've mentioned the simulated one is the predicted plasma concentration profile. But how do we validate that system? Is just we superimpose the clinical profile of any molecule, as you can see the orange one. So this will give a confidence in model development. And if the model is not predicting very well, then you will not get the superimposed profile for both the observed and predicted profiles here.
Okay, Gopal. So thank you very much. You manage your time and you spent your one day. You got one holiday today. I think, as you said, when in UK today is bank holidays, general holiday for all, and you utilize it for your college. It shows your affection, how much you are attached with us emotionally as well. So on behalf of your association, I won't say my alumni association, it's your association, because if students are not there, there is no concept of alumni association. And your alumni association say you a very big thank you for this.
Thank you very much, Sujit sir, for
and it's my pleasure. When we as a teacher, we feel always happy and that students are doing well and really doing better than what we expect. And so it is really wonderful. And I am thankful to all participants who managed their time, who gave their precious time and attended this webinar. And Kelly Alumni Association, Kelly College of Pharmacy promised to come with some more informative webinar. In fact, next week, I think, or by 10th or 14th of the September, we will have one presentation from Dr. Mohit Patel, Lee Meridional Hospital, Florida. So in advance, I am announcing to all of you, please make yourself available. Soon we'll share the link. So thank you, Gopal. Thank you.
Thank you very much, sir. Thank you, one and all. Yes, sir.
Yeah. Thank you.
Have a nice day. Yes.
Yeah, same to you. And thank you to all participants. I conclude this session now. Thank you very much. Bye, Gopal. See you
Bye.
some other fine day. Bye. Take care.
Bye.
Bye.